Good morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Vladimir. The headlines. As Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelinski marks 3 years in office, the United States announces a second $800 million in security assistance for the country, including ghost drones. Russia says captured British soldiers are being looked after. And Kiev's Symphony's European tour marks cultural front in the Ukrainian crisis. It is exactly 3 years ago today that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelinski won the election to the office. And U.S. President Joe Biden has announced an additional $800 million in security assistance for his country to further show up support for it as it faces a fresh onslaught by Russia from its eastern flanks. Addressing Americans from the White House Roosevelt Room, Mr. Biden pledged to send dozens of howitzers, 144,000 rounds of ammunition and tactical drones, as he called on Congress for supplementary funding to provide additional aid for Kiev. The Biden administration also announced it will ban Russian-affiliated ships from American ports, the latest step to pressure Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Russia has said it has entered a new stage of its operation and is methodically seeking to liberate the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Western allies anticipate Russia's campaign could last many months, grind to a stalemate and test the battlefield capabilities of the Ukrainian fighters.
Well, first of all, it's questionable whether he... Today, I'm announcing another $800 million to further augment Ukraine's ability to fight in the east, in the Donbas region. This package includes heavy artillery weapons, dozens of howitzers, and 144,000 rounds of ammunition to go with those howitzers. It also includes more tactical drones. In the past 2 months, we've moved weapons and equipment to Ukraine at record speed. We've sent thousands of anti-armor and anti-missile helicopters, drones, grenade launchers, machine guns, rifles, radar systems. More than 50 million rounds of ammunition had already been sent. The United States alone has provided 10 anti-armor systems for every 1 Russian tank that's in Ukraine, a 10-to-1 ratio. We're sharing and will continue to share significant timely intelligence with Ukraine to help defend them against Russian aggression. Modernize Teddy Roosevelt's famous advice, sometimes we will speak softly and carry a large javelin, because we're sending a lot of those in as well. You know, but we're not sitting on the funding that Congress has provided for Ukraine. We're sending it directly to the front lines of freedom, to the fearless and skilled Ukrainian fighters who are standing in the breach. You got to admit, must be amazed at the courage of this country, the resolve that they're showing, not just their military, but the average citizen, men and women, young men, young women as well. It's, you know, the sustained and coordinated support of the international community, led and facilitated by the United States, is a significant reason why Ukraine is able to stop Russia from taking over their country thus far. Today, I'm announcing that the United States will ban Russian-affiliated ships from our ports, as they did in Europe. That means no ship that sails under the Russian flag or that is owned or operated by a Russian interest will be allowed to dock in a United States port or access our shores. None. None. This is yet another critical step we're taking in concert with our partners in the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and further to deny Russia the benefits of international economic system that they so enjoyed in the past. We don't know how long this war will last, but as we approach the 2-month mark, here's what we do know. Putin has failed to achieve his grand ambitions on the battlefield. After weeks of shelling Kiev, Kiev still stands. President Zelinski and his democratically elected government still remain in power. And the Ukrainian armed forces, joined by many brave Ukrainian civilians, have thwarted Russia's conquest of their country. They've been bolstered from day one by an unstinting supply of weapons, ammunition, armor, intelligence from the nations of the free world, led by us, the United States. As Russia continues to grind out the military advances and their military advances and the brutalities against Ukraine, Putin is banking on us losing interest. That's been my view. You heard me say this from the beginning. He was counting on NATO, European Union, our allies in Asia, cracking, moving away. He's betting on Western unity will crack. He's still betting on that. And once again, we're going to prove him wrong. Well, first of all, it's questionable whether he does control Mariupol. One thing for sure we know about Mariupol, he should allow humanitarian corridors to let people on that steel mill and other places that are buried under rubble to get out, That's what any head of state would do in such a circumstance. And so there is no evidence yet that Mariupol is completely fallen.
And amongst those weapons in the arms package just announced by President Biden are ghost drones, which were developed by the U.S. Air Force for attacking targets and are destroyed after a single use. The United States and its allies have ramped up arms shipments to Kiev ahead of Russia's announced offensive in the east as Moscow tries to salvage its nearly two-month-old campaign. Ukrainian forces have used Western weapons, including Stinger and Javelin missiles, along with drones like the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 and the U.S.-made Switchblade, effectively to target Russian positions. The White House had said earlier that over 121 Phoenix Ghost tactical unmanned aerial systems would be provided to Ukraine as part of the new package. A small number of Ukrainians have also been trained in the United States on how to operate Switchblade drones, single-use weapons that fly into their target and detonate on impact. The chair of NATO's military committee, Admiral Rob Burr, says a new era for NATO has begun after attending a joint training with soldiers from the U.S. Army Striker Company and the Bulgarian Armed Forces. The training showcased the capabilities of the multinational battle group, which Bulgaria is hosting on its Novoselo military grounds, according to its Ministry of Defense. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba appealed to NATO and EU members Bulgaria to provide sorely needed military aid to help his country survive Russia's invasion.
A new era for NATO has begun, and that requires us to be more united than ever. The Bulgarian coat of arms speaks about unity makes strength. This is true for Bulgaria and true for NATO. Over the last 18 years, Bulgaria has proven to be a staunch and committed ally, not least in the Black Sea region, which is of great strategic importance to NATO. Together, we are stronger. Together, we are more. Together, we are NATO. Unity makes strength. Thank you.
Let's talk to Dr. Harry Nedelko. He's the Director of Policy at Rasmussen Global, joins us virtually from Montreal in Canada. Good morning, Dr. Nedelko. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Good morning.
I believe that we can start our conversation directly on the base of NATO. You had worked amongst the several places you had worked in the policy planning unit of NATO, and you had also worked in the office of its Secretary General, so you're quite familiar with the issues surrounding these conflict. Can I begin by asking you, why is Ukraine seemingly so strategic to NATO that all the efforts and all the preparations are going into this situation?
Ukraine is strategic, and Eastern Europe is strategic to NATO for the sole reason that NATO is an organization that is concerned with preserving peace. And this has happened, and NATO has successfully preserved peace for a very, very long time. And the reason is, in a place like Eastern Europe, peace and security is what is needed, the first element you need in order to have a prosperity, an economic prosperity. So that is the starting point for NATO. The second most important, let's say another important element of this is that what Russia is doing now in Ukraine, it is throwing the rules book of the international order. It is attacking a country, and it is committing acts of war crimes in Ukraine, and it is throwing away the post-World War II rules book. And that is very serious.
Given that scenario, perhaps the next question should then be about, given the situation today, 8 weeks into Russia's invasion, NATO seems to now be considering Ukraine as a member, or at least a candidate for membership. Do you think that is strategically viable, especially because Russia has made it abundantly clear that it will never accept that, no matter the cost?
Well, I think right now the goal is the following: to give Ukraine the tools and to ensure that Ukraine can defend itself as best it can, regain as much territory as it can, so that by the time that there will be a peace agreement, Ukraine is in a position that is as strong as possible. I think that is the most important concern right now. But of course, and everybody is realizing this, is that the reason why Russia attacked Ukraine is because Ukraine is not a NATO member, and therefore it's not covered by Article 5. So other countries in Europe that are looking at what's happening see this and are rethinking whether they should perhaps join NATO or not. And here, we have to look at Finland and Sweden. They're having domestic debates within their parliaments to decide whether the security arrangements they have now and the neutrality that they have now is fit for purpose, given what Russia is doing in Europe.
Given the fact that within NATO itself there are fairly significant divergence in views about expansion, even as it is 27 now, there's divergence about how much expansion it should embark upon at this point, and then certainly under the specter of the possibility of a war with Russia, should Sweden and Finland, possibly Denmark, Albania, and a couple of other countries that had been on the queue now join NATO. Don't you see a situation where it's quite possible that, Russia's opposition aside, even from within NATO, you could have significant pushback?
No, actually, if you look at this whole conflict and the way it's unfolded, what we're seeing is, Putin trying at every step to divide the West, including divide allies within NATO. But what we're seeing is an unprecedented unity inside allies at NATO. Because everybody's realizing that what Russia has done, especially now with its invasion of Ukraine, is extremely dangerous. It's dangerous for the security in Europe. It's dangerous to basically the entire security architecture that we've had. So I would say short answer is no. In fact, there's more unity now than there was before.
Well, if you say that, the practical demonstration of the viability of membership is what you referred to as Article 5, which means that if you attack one country, then all other members of NATO will come after you. In that kind of situation, what has happened now on ground in Ukraine is a bit different from that, even though, as you pointed out, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. But President Zelinski, who incidentally is 3 years old in office today, has been pleading almost from day one for two things: for NATO to come to his aid with boots on the ground, and for a no-fly zone over his skies. NATO, the US, the EU have resolutely said no to that. I'm trying to put both on a scale, especially if you're trying to ensure that there is peace.
The reason why NATO cannot put boots on the ground and cannot enforce a no-fly zone is because that would risk direct war with Russia, which implicitly would risk a World War III where nuclear weapons, for the first time in this World War III, would be used. That is something that Western allies, United States, NATO, have tried to avoid. Having said that, allies are doing everything possible to help Ukraine, short of boots on the ground and short of no-fly zone, because no-fly zone, what it would entail is Western planes going over Ukraine, and if Russian planes were to fly over it, shoot them down. That is a direct attack. So that is something that they're going to avoid, and they have avoided because nobody is interested in a war with Russia. But as you can see, there's ample Western support. You've just seen an announcement by Joe Biden for more support. And I would suspect there'll be increasingly more support over the course of this war.
There is, and I must ask you about this also, there is some element, and some have pointed that out, of seeming hypocrisy in all of this, and to say that what Russia is doing with respect to Ukraine, for example, the United States has done in the past under the Monroe Doctrine, and Senator Bernie Sanders did point that out, that the Monroe Doctrine was the issue with reference to Cuba, and had asked the question that if perhaps Mexico had wanted to have a defense alliance with Russia, would the United States stand idly by? As a scholar, is there some sense in that? And why should then Russia be sanctioned or opposed or fought?
Well, there is a difference between the two, and that is a 200-year difference. Monroe stated his doctrine for the first time, if I'm not wrong here, in Congress in the State of the Union address in 1823. So that's 199 years. The expectation
but my apologies to drop this in. The Cuban Missile Crisis was only in 1962.
Yes, but we're talking here about the Monroe Doctrine. So that's
which led to the Cuban crisis.
The Cuban crisis happened in a different era, in a different point in time, during the Cold War.
Okay.
The point I was trying to make is, the expectation is that, right now in the 21st century, we and big countries do not have the kind of big power sort of approach to the world where there are spheres of influence and you can just barge in and then occupy and attack another country and commit war crimes there as well. So these are two different things, and we are in a different situation. We are in the 21st century, and we would have had the expectation not to have that happen. So that is the difference here.
Given that difference, as you put it, other countries are watching what is going on here, and perhaps the opposition that has been put up to Russia is meant to serve as a deterrent to some of the other countries who are watching and may have designs. But some of those countries, in fact, one of them is far more powerful than Russia, and would probably not be as amenable to the kind of sanctions and so on that Russia has faced now. And I'm referring to China. There's been a strategic silence on the part of China, making the right noises here and there, but playing the middle of the road, as it were. Do you think that China is getting the right lesson from the Western powers in terms of, if you also think about this in terms of activities in Hong Kong or what's going on in Taiwan, this is what you are likely to face?
Absolutely, if not worse. I think everybody's getting a lesson here. And to some degree, I think even the West is kind of surprising itself to see that it has come so strong on Russia. Prior to this conflict, the West was very divided. A lot of differences across the Atlantic and within the NATO camp. And now what we're seeing is a very, very strong, very, very clear, united Western response. So yes, I definitely think that they're getting the right lesson.
Which leaves me with just one more question to ask you. Going forward, it seems as if no reference is being made to peace talks or any attempt at negotiating the way out of this anymore. We had those talks in Turkey earlier on, and they raised quite a number of people's hopes, but then that's been put aside now. Do you think the possibility is there, especially with everybody saying this is going to go on for very long, that at some point peace or peace talks would become attractive again?
Yeah, I think that's a natural conclusion to draw. I mean, at one point, this war will end. It will not end as quickly as Putin thought. He thought it was going to end in a few days and take over Kiev and decapitate the leadership. That clearly has not happened. So now he's diverted his focus to the eastern part of Ukraine. But eventually, of course, we will have at one point some sort of peace. The point is to put Ukraine, as I said before, in a position that is as strong as possible, so that when that peace does come, Ukraine can negotiate a peace that it can live with.
Okay, so I guess we'll have to wait and see if that actually ever happens. I like the fact that you ended at a note of optimism that eventually that will be what we'll see. I'm sure there are others who hope that you're very correct. Dr. Harry Nedelky, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for your perspective on the program.
Thank you.
Warsaw's mayor says the international community and Poland's government need to coordinate better and provide more support directly to local governments and charities helping Ukrainian refugees in Poland. The government needed to ask for such help, he said, and only then will we be able to deal with the magnitude of the problem. Warsaw, along with other major urban centers in Poland, such as Krakow and Wrocław, have accepted thousands of refugees, with Warsaw's population growing about 15% since Russia invaded Ukraine on February the 24th. Poland has, however, received international praise for its handling of the refugee crisis, with almost 3 million people entering the country in less than 2 months. Two British men captured by Russian forces while fighting in Ukraine are being taken care of. That's according to Russia. Aidan Arslan, 28, and Sean Pennant, 48, were captured last week while defending the southeastern city of Mariupol. And footage shown on Russian state television, both appeared to have facial bruising, prompting their families to call for the Geneva Convention to be respected. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "Don't worry, the Russian side is taking care of them." She added they are fed, watered, and given the necessary assistance, just like other foreigners who have surrendered or have been detained. Ms. Zakharova also referenced what she described as a call by Prime Minister Boris Johnson for British detainees to be shown mercy, and said that in turn, Britain should show mercy to the citizens of Ukraine by stopping the supply of weapons to the Ukrainian government. The Danish and Spanish prime ministers traveled to Kiev to meet Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelinski in a show of support. Flanked by armed soldiers, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and her Spanish counterpart Pedro Sanchez met Mr. Zelinski on the street in the center of the Ukrainian capital. Both countries have pledged to send Ukraine more weapons as Russia steps up its offensive in the eastern Donbas region. Mr. Sanchez announced Spain has sent a new batch of 200 tons of ammunition and military supplies to Ukraine, and the Danish delegation said new consignments of weapons were being planned. The Danish premier also visited the badly damaged town of Bodoryanka, which was retaken after Russian troops withdrew from the region around the capital. Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Ola Stefanitska visited the town of Borodyanka in Ukraine, as we've been reporting. Both of them, the Ukrainian officials, saw now bombed and burnt-out buildings after the town was liberated and Russian troops pulled back. Residents and military personnel shared their experiences of what happened after Russian tanks first showed up in early March. Eyewitnesses told the Spanish Prime Minister that 41 bodies were found in one building, but they were unable to recover them as they were still being shelled by the Russians. Numerous European leaders have traveled to Ukraine since Russia's invasion to show support for its president and people, more especially since Russia pulled back its forces from northern Ukraine. Let's talk now to Curtis Adigba, attorney, foreign affairs analyst. He joins us virtually from Abuja. Good morning, Mr. Adigba. Thank you for your time on the program this morning.
Morning, Ladi. I'm actually in Lagos.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you for joining us all the same.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
The situation on the ground now is kind of like a stalemate, if you like. Western support is ensuring that Ukraine has enough arms to survive, but it's not strong enough to beat the Russians. The Russians, on the other hand, are being stymied by sanctions of all types and of all shapes, and they have, of course, also witnessed some military setbacks. Do you think that it is time to discuss peace?
Well, it's never late to discuss peace, no matter the situation on ground. Now, for Russia, this is dragging on for too long. Because if you match their strength in terms of weapons and influence in the region, no one believed that by now Ukraine will be standing at all. Like you observed, the Western world are backing Ukraine, sending in help, and Ukraine is standing, even though it's not matching Russia in terms of military strength, but it's standing. And that alone is enough damage to the reputation of Russia, a superpower, when you talk about military arsenal. So I think this is the right time for the world at large to begin to speak to Russia more about making peace, because this is not going to be determined by the use of force.
Given that scenario, let us now come to the mechanics of everything here. There are those who have pointed out that Russia attacked Ukraine unprovoked, quote and unquote, and there are others who say that Russia is guiding its own security. My previous guest on the program this morning did say that the situation by which comparisons are being made between what Russia is doing now and what other superpowers have done in the past is not exactly correct. But do you think that Russia has a point in its security concerns, and that any negotiation to end this war should take that into consideration? Otherwise, we will be looking at deja vu, shall we say.
Okay, so let's look at it this way. I think it's a matter of perspective. If there is an issue on the table, you are bound to find people with different perspective on the issue. Now, this is Russia's claim. Ukraine is a strategic asset as far as Russia is concerned, and it's too close for comfort for NATO and the West to have any influence in Ukraine. Ukraine has not hidden her desire to join NATO or the European Union. And of course, Ukraine will not be the first country to aspire to do so. Don't forget that out of the 15 countries that used to be the Soviet Union, countries like Poland, Lithuania, Liechtenstein, Romania, Bulgaria, Tajikistan, and many of them have joined Europe, and they have also joined NATO. Now, Ukraine consistently wants to be part of NATO because of the same reason that Russia is doing, because of the same fear of what Russia is doing to them right now, which is to be shielded and protected from Russia. Now, Russia, on the other hand, feels that Ukraine is too close for comfort, and that once NATO or Europe steps their foot on Ukraine, it will be pushing Russia further down, and Russia will lose her influence. And so this is what is at stake. Look, in 2008, I think Russia also went to Georgia in pursuit of the same goal. But this is the reality of the situation. Putin, from the day he became president of Russia, had just one goal in mind: reestablish the boundaries of the old Soviet Union. And Putin is going to come at you with excuses, to justify what he's doing all over Europe. Except he stopped, he's not going to stop. In 2014, he moved into Crimea. That was shortly after the Russia-leaning president, former president, Viktor Yanukovych, was removed from power by massive protests of the Ukrainians because he was against Ukraine joining Europe. And Putin used that as an excuse to move into Crimea, annexed Crimea as part of Russia, and he's in the same area now, in the Donbass area, trying to do the same thing. So I understand when people say, this is pretense, Western powers, superpowers will always find excuses. But don't forget that Ukraine is now a sovereign nation. From 1991, when it became an independent nation, it attained our own sovereignty. Now, if you compare that situation to what America did in Iraq and in other parts of in Afghanistan, of course, there were reasons for strategic national interests of America that was at stake. Now, eventually, we found out about Iraq that the reasons given for invading Iraq, of course, were something that were cooked up. But the reality is that we cannot say because something was wrong somewhere, if it is wrong now, it has to be right because someone else did something that was wrong. We can't just do that. Look at the poor people in Ukraine who are suffering from the aggression of Russia. They are not involved in the day-to-day politics of influence between President Zelinski and President Putin. So there has to be some sense. The world has to come together. Apart from supporting Ukraine to stand firm and defend our sovereignty, the world also needs to trigger mechanism for peace right now. Because the suffering is becoming too much. We are not hearing so much about the Russian side. But of course, don't also underestimate the fact that Russia is suffering from what is happening.
That's correct. And the other way of looking at this, of course, is that all wars end with peace, or at least peace talks. And even when there are military victories, those who are losers also need to still be talked to. And that brings me to who you think could champion this, because it seems as if many of those who have the leverage have taken sides. So who is it that can be considered by both parties as neutral enough, yet have the kind of leverage to get both of them to negotiate, as it were, reasonably, especially because both sides seem to be backed by various people?
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's difficult to look around the horizon and say, look, this is the perfect peacemaker in this situation. But again, in international politics, neutrality is a phantom. It's not real. It's all about strategic interests. Now, I think China still has some leverage over Russia. And a lot of people will say, how is that possible? Because China is in a similar situation. And China is supporting Russia because in the future, it might also want to invade Vietnam over the same kind of situation. But the truth is that Russia right now is busting. Russia depends on her gas and her military, to show her strength on the global scene. Now, the military is winning in the sense that it has not achieved that clinical victory that it thought was possible in Ukraine. Now, on the economic side, European nations are beginning to look to countries like Qatar and others to get their gas supply. Now, what that means is that the Russian economy is going to be in serious trouble. And so if Vladimir Putin is brought to face reality on the situation by China, or a country like Canada that has not shown so much hands in the crisis, I think there's a chance for peace.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Mr. Curtis Adigba, attorney, foreign affairs analyst, joining us virtually, of course, from the nation's commercial capital here in Lagos. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
While all that is unfolding, we'll take a look at some business news. Oil prices extended losses on Friday, heading for a 4% weekly drop and burdened by the prospect of rate hikes, weaker global growth, and COVID-19 lockdowns in China hurting demand, even as the European Union weighed a ban on Russian oil. Brent crude futures were down $1.17 or 1.1% to $107.16 a barrel. This morning, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate declined by also $1.17, 1.1% to $102.62 a barrel. Let's talk about this with Laddie Williams of our business desk. Laddie, welcome. Morning. I hesitate to raise this because we raise it every day now.
Right.
Oil prices.
Yeah.
For the week, because today is Friday, for the week, it seems it's going to end negatively.
Yes, which is good. Oil prices going down is good because at the end of the day, when you have elevated, oil prices, we've seen how that impacted, energy prices globally. That has also stoked, inflation. So right now we're seeing the prices quite stable, unlike March,
Yeah, where the gyrations were wide.
Exactly. We saw the wild swings with Brent oil hitting about $139 per barrel, and that was on, supply concerns, with, Russia, the largest exporter of oil, disruptions for that country also means there will be disruptions to supply to the world. So we saw how that impacted prices. But now we're having demand concerns coming from China, which is, the largest buyer of oil at this point. So when we're seeing weaker demand, obviously prices will drop, right? Which is good for energy prices. As oil comes down, energy prices will also come down, and
that will have impact on household incomes as well.
Exactly. So it's a good thing, and we hope oil prices go even lower at this point.
Well, while you say that, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, is cautioning against a Russian oil buy, particularly in the EU,
right.
Because she says that could bring back what you're saying is now seemingly tapering off, which is high prices.
Exactly. So what she's saying is, you know what, we understand that, Russia is funding, this war with, selling its gas and oil. And obviously, we see the dependence of Europe on Russian oil at this point. And so we know the U.S. and its allies are trying to wean off, Europe from a reliance on Russian gas, at this point. But what she's saying is, we get it. We don't want to fund, Russia's war. But at the same time, a total ban on Russian gas would impact Europe negatively. So she's saying, at the end of the day, prices are going to go up if Russian oil is actually outrightly banned and gas outrightly banned at this point. That will trickle into prices, meaning Russia will still sell their oil to maybe friendly nations, but at a higher price, even though it would impact, the volume that they're selling.
That they're selling and the volume that those people are capable of buying.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, we're still going to see elevated prices, which will also stoke inflation even more. So she's saying, you know what, let's be cautious, with banning, with outright ban of Russian gas, by Europe, because at the end of the day, Putin will still be able to sell to friendly nations, and he will sell at a higher price. So at the end of the day, they have to think.
Very carefully about this.
Yeah. You're choosing between the devil and the deep blue sea here. You don't want to fund his war, but at the same time, you need his gas. So it's a tough place to be.
Now, the Russian authorities are making a digital ruble.
Right.
This should be familiar with us because we have
the e-naira.
E-naira here, and that's in addition to a homegrown credit card.
Yeah, because we've seen how MasterCard and Visa have pulled out their services from Russia, and that has impacted their financial system because they need these cards to make settlements. So they're trying to make an alternative, which is called the MIR banking card. But another thing is acceptability. You know, will other countries accept, you know, these,
especially given the situation now.
The situation at hand. So they're saying, you know what, we're going to also work on a digital ruble, you know, so they can settle international payments. You know, they've been cut off from, you know, the global financial system. You know, obviously, the whole world relies on, you know, the SWIFT messaging system. So with this sanctions, you know, on Russia and their financial system, they have to look for alternatives. And now, central bank experts are saying, you know what, this is, you know, prompting countries to look, you know, outside, you know, dominance on the SWIFT system and, you know, global financial system, trying to, you know, bring up the digital ruble now, which would actually make payments more direct to other countries, and they don't have to rely on
the traditional banks and the traditional system
and all of that. So at the end of the day, they're seeing most countries might actually toe this line to find alternatives. That's if you're going to be on the wrong side of the law when it comes to America.
Right.
If you're going to get sanctioned, you're going to want to have alternatives, because we're seeing these sanctions bite hard. You know, the Russian economy, they're not able to make their bond payments at this time. So they're looking for alternatives to weather this storm and, you know, be able to make international settlements as it's going. So the central bank, Russian central bank governor is saying, you know what, we're going to start testing this digital ruble from next year, see how it goes, try and get, you know, other countries to actually accept it. But at the end of the day, it's a slow process, and it's going to happen. Plans are going on.
We know that good in Nigeria here about how slow the process is.
Right, and, you know, acceptability from other countries is another issue for that.
Before I let you go, the war in Ukraine obscures so many other things going on, and which have impact on business, but it also exacerbates those things. In Asia, you have all the stocks mostly sliding yesterday and actually during the course of the week, based on comments from the central banks in China and the U.S.
And the U.S.
This is related to the COVID lockdowns that have continued in China in particular, but also exacerbated by the war situation in Ukraine and the unavailability of materials, so to speak, from both Ukraine and Russia.
Right. So at the end of the day, it's inflation. Inflation is the enemy right now, and there's also talk about stagflation. So central bankers globally are trying to rein in, you know, inflation at this point, and we're seeing, you know, the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, actually talking about a bigger than expected rate hike by next month. This actually spooked investors, because at the end of the day, we're seeing, you know, businesses, cost of borrowing for businesses actually skyrocket at this point. And they're saying, you know what, it's time to take our money, some of these investments
out of here before we get into a crisis position.
Exactly. So rate hikes are the major issue for investors, you know, at this point. And we're seeing, we saw the NASDAQ actually sell-offs from Netflix. We saw
which had a problem yesterday, really big downgrade yesterday.
Yeah, we saw NASDAQ slip about 2%. We saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that was down about 1.05%. S&P 500 down 1.48%. We also saw, you know, sell-offs in Europe and Asia, and obviously that impacted Bitcoin. We're seeing, you know, a sell-off this morning too. Bitcoin has lost about 2%, you know, from the last high. So at the end of the day, I keep saying it's not an easy time for investors. They have a lot to, you know, decide at this point. Where do we take our monies to?
How long do we keep it there?
How long do we keep it there? For short-term traders, it's not easy. But at the end of the day, if you're a long-term minded, you know, investor, and you can weather this storm, take some short-term losses, then you
might end up ahead at the end of the day.
You might end up ahead, yeah.
Laddie Williams, thank you for the analysis. Of course, there's more on Business Morning and Business Incorporated. Business Morning comes up after this show. Business Incorporated is at 1:30. But for now, thank you.
Thank you.
Over in Ethiopia, drawn by rumors on social media, young men and old, many with their military records in hand, have gathered outside the Russian embassy in the capital, Addis, with hopes of fighting for Moscow in Ukraine. Despite the Russian embassy denying recruiting Ethiopian fighters, Ethiopian men continue to gather in a bid to volunteer.
Join the Russian military, and the possibility of work in Russia after the war inspired some Ethiopian men to queue up outside the Russian embassy in Addis Ababa. Many parts of Ethiopia are ridden by conflict, and annual inflation hovers around 30%. So many here say they are eager to leave the country.
Inflation is rising day by day. Life is very hard here. So I am willing to leave Ethiopia to support the Russian government in whatever way I can. I want to go and fight along Russians.
The reason I want to go to Russia is not because I want to fight Ukraine, but it is because I am not benefiting from my country.
The rumor followed news reports in March that Russian President Vladimir Putin had given the green light for up to 16,000 volunteers from the Middle East to be deployed alongside Russian-backed rebels to fight in Ukraine. The Russian embassy issued a statement on Tuesday saying that it's not recruiting fighters and that Ethiopians who showed up outside were well-wishers expressing solidarity and support for the Russian Federation. Ethiopia has called on all sides in the war to exercise restraint and did not vote on a UN General Assembly resolution condemning the February 24 invasion of Ukraine, which Russia calls a special military operation to demilitarize the country. But many in Ethiopia voiced solidarity with Russia, which has enjoyed close relations with the Horn of Africa nation since the Soviet era.
Let's take some sports news. Former tennis world #1 Serena Williams and 7-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton have joined Martin Broughton's bid to buy Premier League club Chelsea. Former Liverpool chairman Broughton's consortium includes World Athletics president Sebastian Coe and wealthy investors from around the world who the group says all want to maintain Chelsea's top status. Private equity veterans Josh Harris and David Blitzer, who own sports teams including the National Basketball Association's Philadelphia 76ers, are also backing Britain's bid. Williams and Hamilton have pledged an estimated £10 million each to the bid, according to media reports. Williams is already an investor in Los Angeles Angel City FC, which plays in the National Women's Soccer League. Final bids for the club, which was put up for sale by owner Roman Abramovich following Russia's invasion of Ukraine before sanctions were imposed on the oligarch by the British government, were due earlier this month. For Eleonora Timoshenko, a music teacher from Balaklia near Kiev in eastern Ukraine, and now a refugee in Warsaw, a night of Ukrainian music is food for her soul as she reflects on the conflict ravaging her home. Timoshenko was one of hundreds of spectators, including diplomats and dignitaries, at the concerts to watch the Kiev Symphony Orchestra kick off its tour around Europe. For the last 2 weeks, the musicians and their families have been staying in Warsaw. They have been rehearsing and preparing for their tour while taking refuge from the ongoing conflict in their country. With a special dispensation from the Ukrainian government to allow its male musicians to leave Ukraine instead of serving in the military, the orchestra will also perform in the Polish city of Lodz, several German cities, and possibly add more stops.
We have a really important mission with our orchestra. We need to say to the world that we are Ukrainians. We have our own culture. and we have our own history.
We believe that maybe some governmental people will come to our concert in Germany, and after the concert, somehow, like a fairy tale, will decide to give us more military help, because Culture Fund is great. But we need military help, and we need this support from Germany, country that has a lot of weapons, and this can help Ukraine.
There's a mixture there of peace, but at the same time, still determination to protect the country. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiri. There's an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. Do join us for that. But for now, do have yourselves a good weekend ahead.